And here we are to Chapter 5, Colonial Society on the Eve of Revolution. Notice the dates. Okay, this one is describe the basic population and social structure of the 18th century, meaning 1700s, and indicate how they had changed since the 17th century, which is the 1600s. So please be on the first page, page 88 of your book. It explains it all in there. Major growth in the colonies. They had grown, as you see here. They were very young, which leads to a lot of good things. Young, ambitious, hardworking, creative, ingenious, that's a word. They're going to outnumber British subjects 3-1, up from 20-1. And I think I have that right. Half of them were English. Look at the map on page 89. So it's not just the English by now. So we see certain groups come along and they play their part in history. The Scots-Irish, they're not Irish. They are not Catholic. They are Presbyterian, and they are more closely linked to the English, though they had some hatred of the English. But just know when the Irish come over that they're different. So they're pushed into Ireland, but they're not Catholic. Andrew Jackson was one of them. They're a fiery kind of group. At least their examples in history are Hatfields and McCoys are examples. Africans, forced migration, Native Americans, Europeans, the melting pot. There is no nobility class in America in the colonies. The kings and queens and dukes and duchesses and the classes that were born into that luck. And there was no real pauper, meaning just really poor begging kind of class that had no hope. They had all who had left Europe, that's what I meant. So Americans were more like a middle group, which was really good for them as a country. But social classes do begin to emerge. New England began running out of room and farms start dividing up. And, it's just kind of human nature. The haves and the have-nots start to show themselves. The Southern hierarchy gaps widened and solidified themselves, creating their own dukes and duchesses with these big plantations, the master and the mistress. Remember the triangle. And there's the map again. Okay, so it's easy reading in the beginning, just different, obviously, just diverse from the get-go. That's just how we are. 2, explain how the economic development of the colonies altered the patterns of social prestige and wealth, meaning importance. Again, compared to Europe, America was the beacon of equality and opportunity. You were born into those classes in Europe and you couldn't get out of them. Turn to page 91 with me and read this first paragraph. I like this. And if you remember, I think from the last chapter, dukes don't migrate. They have it good in Europe, and why would they come over here? So the colonial structure, or the structure of colonial society on page 91. In comparison to contemporary Europe, 18th century America seemed like a shining land of equality and opportunity, with the notorious exception of slavery. No titled nobility dominated society from on high, and no pauperized underclass threatened it from below, meaning leading a riot against everybody else. Most white Americans and even a handful of free blacks were small farmers. Clad in buckskin breeches, they owned modest holdings and tilled them with their hands and horses, meaning land. That was just amazing to own land. The cities contained a small class of skilled artisans with their well-greased leather aprons, as well as shopkeepers, tradespeople, and some unskilled day laborers. The most remarkable feature of the social ladder was its openness. An ambitious colonist, even a former indentured servant, could rise from a lower rung to a higher one, a rare step in old England. That really sums up America from the very beginning and still today. But B, as time went on, industries grew, and of course in the hands of a few, and the Southern Triangle, can't forget that. They had every intention of keeping it that way. A lower pauper class was emerging with more indentured servants without any prospects unless they ventured into Indian territory. Jailbirds, spelled as it used to be spelled. There were people dumped in the colonies and in Australia, probably some 50,000 of them, who were that was their punishment, was being banished from whatever European country, big chunk of them England. So that doesn't help your population when you get somebody's, outcast. And of course, millions of slaves created the most oppressed class, which will divide this country. The triangular trade, can't forget this, page 95. I love that. It looks like all these lines going everywhere. So take a look at that. And not everybody's going to get rich off of that. Certainly it'll spread to some. And then look on page 94, colonial society. Still, it was the best place to be. The first Great Awakening. I love this. We had a first, that means there's a second. Let me give you a little history of some of the churches. Calvinism, John Calvin, basically the guy who inspired the Puritans and leads to the Congregational Church in New England, and the Presbyterians were also quite similar, and they ruled in New England. Anglicans, members of the Church of England, were found, let's get the correct grammar here, in the New York area on down. Anglicans were loyal to the crown in England. They were most like the English, not as religiously strict, nearly, nobody was, as the Puritans, but they had more fun, like the English. And again, these were all found in colonies, not based on religion. But time goes on. By the 1730s, in all areas, even in New England, religious zeal had waned. Means gone away, kind of. 100 years have passed since the time of the first Puritan separatists. New thinking started to emerge. Perhaps people were not predestined to go to heaven or hell, and you had no control over it. So fiery preachers like Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield. Here's Jonathan. He looks a little cross-eyed in this painting. I don't know if that was the case or not. And you see this lady, she's, swooning. He's like the first Frank Sinatra. And here's George Whitefield. Who wouldn't love that hair? There's Jonathan, and he wrote Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. How God hates us and hangs us over the pits of fire and hell like a spider. I mean, it's really kind of scary. Where was I? So new thinking emerged. Okay, we did that. So Jonathan Edwards, these guys preached that only the grace of God could save us. People were not predestined. Good works couldn't save you either. You just had to be as holy as possible. Therefore, only through worship and salvation could one be converted or saved. So this odd, emotional, hellfire and damnation preaching began. You are all sinners and going to hell, and it sort of had this scare tactic against kind of shock and awe in the church there of people. And they just started, was it real? Was it fake? I don't know. But they just started swooning and fainting all over the place. And so this spreads like wildfire. And they have these, what are they called? Religious revivals all over the place. Okay, so causes. Like I said, these new things up above, and these preachers and young and, preaching a new kind of thing that it appealed to people. People have moved out to remote areas, and gosh, just a revival to go be with other people. They're so lonely on the frontier. And the frontier in this time period is just maybe to the foot of the Appalachians. Maybe they went over them. Women had new roles in colonial societies to ensure the survival of the family. This emotive or emotional Christianity appealed to them. Basically, if they feared God and lived a moral life, they could be rewarded in the afterlife or even rewarded here. By this time, the idea of having people who were better, your betters, or who have been elected, the elect, like the Puritans, to the church was getting out of date because we were democracy. Okay, it's down here. So effects of the First Great Awakening. It democratized colonists, which they already kind of were. If everyone was equal to God, then they're more equal here on earth. So, it's just going to kind of fire up this idea of equality and democracy. It's going to break down the power of those dominant churches. The Methodist Church begins to take hold. The Baptist Church starts, breaks down denominational ties to the old Presbyterian, Congregational, Puritan churches. individual revival and redemption could get you into heaven. So you don't need some, scary preacher guy saying you get to get in or not. They began to reject Puritan ideals, that just scary, can't do anything on a Sunday kind of stuff. Kind of reliance on the heart rather than the head, as it put, meaning just studying the Bible. Are you in your heart a true Christian? Created new colleges to train these new ministers. I think you might have heard of Princeton, Brown, Dartmouth. Revivals began. The church revival, 3, 4, 5 days long. And that's it for those questions.